Over the years we've been together, Zephyr has gotten used to my meticulous care and endless compromises. So on the day I left, he just sat on the bed and asked me inferiorly, "When will you be back?" That day, as I fastened the last button of my collar, I told him, "I'm not coming back." The man sneered, then nodded. "Fine. Then don't come back." Later, Zephyr searched high and low. He called me non-stop and grabbed my friends, asking them one by one almost pleadingly, asking where I had gone. When I went to the art studio to find Zephyr, the afternoon light just fell on him as he was guiding a painting. The faint golden lines outlined the man's silhouette, as if it were crafted by the most renowned hand in ancient Greece. Zephyr was always like this, and whatever he did could completely draw my attention. When my gaze landed on him, my mind just couldn't function anymore. I clenched the phone in my hand, thinking of the last few text messages in it. "Vivian has returned to the country. Everyone is keeping it from Zephyr for you for now. You two are about to get married. Who knows what kind of trouble that woman will cause." I had chased after him for so long, exhausting everything I had. I thought that one day his eyes would fall on me. But his ex-girlfriend, with whom he had been entangled for 6 years, came back right before our wedding. Zephyr doesn't eat spicy food. Zephyr doesn't like coriander. Zephyr prefers a light diet and less oil. I seemed to know everything about him by heart without having to deliberately remember. I tightened and unloosened the lunchbox in my hand. Although it was already past class time, the students in the art studio showed no sign of letting him go. The young girl's short skirt didn't even reach her knees. Every time she looked up to ask him questions, I suspected that Zephyr could catch the scent of her perfume. Would the boxed meal get cold? Would he not like the taste I made today? I hesitated countless times at the door until the girl finally let him go. The man walked with a brisk pace and only stopped when he saw me standing at the door blocking his way. "Zephyr. Lunch. I won't eat. There's a seminar soon." He frowned slightly, cutting me off. I froze there. And in an instant, tears welled up in my eyes. In the evening, I stared blankly at the lunchbox in the trash can. Senior female student. I'm sorry. Zephyr didn't touch it at all. I thought it was something he didn't want, so I threw it away for him. The girl covered her mouth and laughed. And the word "something he didn't want" seemed to be deliberately pointed. I wasn't in the mood to deal with this unprovoked provocation. There have always been many women around Zephyr. In the past, I might have argued with them, but now I don't even understand how I can be so indifferent. The door of the conference room opened, and Zephyr walked out surrounded by people. I saw the president of a certain art association bowing and scraping to him. Clearly, having fulfilled my obsession. This old man was making things difficult for a fledgling designer in our company at the dinner table last week. I thought, no wonder so many people are eager to get close to Zephyr. The man obviously didn't want to deal with the old man. His downcast eyes were full of impatience. After seeing me, he strode towards me. "Why are you here?" He must have seen the lunchbox in the trash can, but his black eyes just passed over it inferiorly. I opened my mouth, and after a long while, I still smiled first. I gathered the windbreaker in my hand and handed it to him. "Zephyr. It's getting colder outside. I'm afraid you'll catch a cold." "Hey, hadn't fulfilled my obsession. Is the one who gave the clothes Zephyr's fiancé?" "Yes, having fulfilled my obsession. They seem to be getting married in the second half of the year. Don't you know?" My memory is still stuck a few years ago. The one who had a big commotion with Zephyr. Isn't it the one in front of us? Sure. Don't say that. Everyone knows that name can't even be mentioned in front of Zephyr. On the way home, I leaned against the car window glass and somehow remembered the conversation I overheard between 2 employees just now. Is that so? Zephyr's first love. Like a mosquito bite mark. A willful and scorching son. Had a huge fight with him 3 years ago. Then left him with a mess and went abroad freely. She became Zephyr's. A thorn in his heart. I had exhausted everything, but still couldn't break down the thick wall she had built around his heart. Outside the window, the traffic was busy. I stared at the neon lights flowing like a stream of light and suddenly said, "Liar." I couldn't hold back, and a tremor leaked in the ending sound. What? The man driving glanced at me. You said you'd eat the meal. He sighed. A person who has always been impatient showed a little bit of compromise for the first time. Where's the meal? Your assistant threw it away. He gave in sound. When the green light came on, he stepped on the gas pedal. And his voice was flat without much emotion. Then I'll fire her tomorrow. Okay? This was his way of solving things. I continued to lean against the glass, watching the fine rain falling like silk threads, melting into the colorful window view. Aurora, what are you sulking about? The lights at home weren't on. Because of the rain. The car was parked in the yard. And both of us were damp. When his big hand pinched the back of my neck, I felt a bit desolate. He pushed me against the entrance and kissed my earlobe. You were the one who chased me, right? You've been pestering me for how many years? 2 years? Who do you think you are? Just because you like me, I have to respond. Who cares about you? He pushed me there, rubbing the inside of my knee, and asked me, yeah? What did you answer? Did you say you'd do anything to be with me? Zephyr's words laid all my embarrassment bare. It was like exposing a dying fish to the blazing sun. He didn't have much patience. Since he couldn't get an answer from pressuring me, he laughed mockingly, hugged me, and only stiff and when he seemed to feel the temperature on my neck and shoulders. Then he laughed again. Cry then. After you finish crying, I'll continue. You see, he had used up that little bit of patience with me again. At some point, the fine drizzle turned into a downpour. I stared into his eyes in the deep night. Zephyr. I called his name. Do you think I'll never leave? I didn't get an answer to this question. Because the doorbell rang, interrupting our delicate atmosphere. It was raining heavily outside. Before opening the door, I couldn't figure out who would come to visit in such weather. Until the white figure in front of me gradually became clear. The girl's makeup was a bit smudged by the rain, but her glamorous arrogance remained undiminished. She didn't even look at me, and her eyes were fixed straight behind me. The girl who had a memorable fight with him 3 years ago, now like ink in the continuous heavy rain, appeared in front of him again. She seemed to have full confidence, with a sense of superiority and condescension. Zephyr, do you really want to spend your whole life with a woman you don't like? I'm right in front of you now. Will you marry me? I turned around to look. Through the layers of rain curtain, the man froze. His pupils dark, and he just stared at her without blinking. I thought, it's so annoying. Now I don't need to consider whether to tell Zephyr that she's back. I moved aside a little to make their eye contact more direct and finished the words I hadn't said. Zephyr, maybe we should call off the wedding? The heavy rain continued, as if it could never wash away her wet gaze. But I didn't expect that Zephyr closed the door without hesitation. In an instant, the noisy living room became quiet again. Don't think too much. I heard his steady voice. The man lowered his eyes and gently wrapped a towel around my bangs that were wet from the rain. There's no chance between me and her. Days seemed to pass as usual. And the day of my wedding with Zephyr was getting closer. What else could I do? Both sets of parents had met. Relatives and friends all knew. And we received congratulatory letters from time to time. It seemed that everything was pushing us forward. I went to the art studio as usual. Recently, an international competition was coming to an end. It had a wide influence. I was putting the finishing touches on my painting. But for some reason, the few strokes I added didn't turn out as I wanted. When I was getting a bit annoyed, the door of the art studio was suddenly knocked. Aurora, someone is looking for you. At that time, I didn't think much of it. I just thought it was some friend who knew I was getting married and came to congratulate me. Until I saw the girl with her hands behind her back, long hair reaching her waist, looking at me with a smile. It was Vivian. Hello? What should I call you? Zephyr's fiancée? The outdoor temperature was sweltering, and the blazing summer sunlight fell on her eyes and brows. They all say Vivian is beautiful. It's an extremely flamboyant kind of beauty that can almost seize one's soul in an instant. What are you doing here? I subconsciously rubbed the paint on the tip of my finger. The shadows were clearly defined. The dazzling light landed on the snow-white skin of the girl opposite, and the blood vessels were clearly visible. She twitched the corners of her mouth and smiled at me. The next second, I only felt a flash of light in front of my eyes. She moved too fast. I had no way to dodge. By the time I came to my senses, the pain had exploded on my face. Vivian, head of Ernley. She used a blade to scratch my face. My heart was pounding in my ears like drumbeats. And the summer wind was rustling. I covered my face. And my vision was filled with dark red. Blood splattered onto my unfinished painting. I thought. Damn it. She's really a crazy woman. Let me see. A 6-centimeter long cut. Fortunately, you dodged quickly. She was aiming for the middle of your face. The cicadas chirping at night was disturbing. The person opposite was still holding my face, looking at it from side to side, smiling with great interest. It'll leave a scar. Are you afraid? Since I went to the hospital to deal with the wound in the afternoon until now, I'd been staring at the handsome face of the guy in a white coat opposite, who was smiling in a cynical way. I wasn't even interested in telling him to get lost. Leo, my childhood friend. He chose science and I chose liberal arts in the second year of high school. And we went our separate ways since then. We haven't not seen each other over the years. But for some reason, Zephyr doesn't really like him. So I've had less and less contact with him. This time, when I went to the emergency department with my face covered in blood, unexpectedly, it happened to be his shift. Tell me. What happened? With a bandage on my face, I looked at Oscar opposite, who was swinging his long legs through the other eye. He didn't seem to be planning to get off work, determined to get to the bottom of things. Since we met, this guy has never been reliable. It was Zephyr's ex-girlfriend who did it. I pointed to the cut on my forehead and briefly summarized the matter. When I turned my head, I saw the guy opposite laughing again. Actually, I have a pretty good temper. But the only person who has always made me angry at the sight of him since childhood is Leo. What's so funny? Because of the bandage. I could barely speak clearly. Are you still going to marry Zephyr? He bent his eyes and asked me. I didn't expect him to ask me this question so directly. I was stunned for a moment. Then I saw the smile in his eyes gradually disappear. After a moment, there was a serious and expectant look in his dark eyes. So I couldn't say anything. It seems that over the years, only Leo has asked me such a question. Everyone else said congratulations. That I finally got to be with the person I like. After all, he's Zephyr. The Zephyr whose 1 square meter painting can be exchanged for an apartment in a small county town. If I said I was leaving Zephyr, everyone would think I was crazy. I lowered my eyes, wanting to say something. But Leo suddenly changed the topic to amuse me. He's been like this since he was a child. Looking carefree. The sunset seeped through the thin blinds onto the windowsill. I kind of missed Zephyr. Actually, I called him the moment I got hurt. But he didn't answer. Normally, heading Kasselwad Sasher, he wouldn't not answer my call for so long. I couldn't help but worry a bit. I called one of his friends, hoping to get some news. Zephyr? The person on the other side seemed a bit evasive but still told me. He's dealing with something. Vivian. You know her. Right? She got into some trouble and was taken to the police station. The girl has no one to rely on in the country. Zephyr has been at the police station handling things for her. He just finished. He'll probably call you back soon. I held my phone, wondering why my voice was so calm. Guess how Vivian ended up in the police station? How did she? I called the police and had her sent there. I hung up the phone, not knowing what to say. Then I heard Leo's words. Softly, in the lazy tune of the sunset. Don't get married. Is he worth it? Oscar. My wife and I's affairs are none of your business. A voice full of anger interrupted us. I looked up and met a pair of deep black eyes. He was still wearing a shirt, buttoned up to the collar. But he seemed to be in a hurry. I didn't know if it was because his current girlfriend was injured or his ex-girlfriend was taken to the police station. My wrist was pulled up a bit forcefully. I wanted to struggle. But he held me down. He was angry. Why? It was inexplicable. In the car, the air conditioner was humming. Neither he nor I spoke. He sighed and tried to touch the bandage on my face. Does it hurt? I suddenly turned my head to the side. Still silent. He just looked at me, counting silently for a few seconds, as if he was certain that I would give in. Yes, having fulfilled my obsession. After a while, I laughed first, not knowing what I was laughing at. I asked him, Zephyr, do you know who made this cut? His eyes fell on my face, still calm and self-possessed. What do you want? I want her to be locked up in prison for the rest of her life until she dies. I've seen the injury assessment report. It's not that serious. Fortunately, cutting till Feldley, there was a bandage covering my face. Otherwise I wouldn't know what expression to use to look at him. I wanted to say, Zephyr, there are men who would fight to the death when they know their wife's face has been scratched. But what about you? My phone suddenly vibrated. It was the number of the police officer I left when I called the police. I answered it in front of Zephyr. Aurora, this is the situation. As long as you're willing to sign the letter of understanding, the other party is willing to compensate you 200 Azura yuan. If you have any other requirements, you can also mention them. I looked up at the man opposite, pulled out a smile that I didn't even think was a smile, and mouthed to him, Is it your money? He looked at me, and said nothing. I sneered and then replied to the person on the phone, I won't sign. After hanging up the phone, the person beside me stepped on the gas pedal. Amid the roar of the engine, I heard his faint voice. Suit yourself. Because of the injury on my face, I took a few days off at home. Then I rushed to finish the painting for the competition in the studio and finally submitted it before the deadline. These days, Zephyr picked me up from work. I could feel that his attitude towards me had softened. Perhaps the injury on my face finally made him feel guilty towards me. For several days, he was extremely patient no matter how I threw a tantrum. Ouch. Do you know how to change the dressing? The medicine touched the wound, and I shrank back suddenly. The purple medicine sloshed out, and a few drops landed on his shirt. He wasn't angry, just held my chin straight. I don't. So be good and don't move. Such good temper was truly rare. I could hardly get angry. Plus, my work was successfully shortlisted. The day I removed the bandage, Leo told me that there probably wouldn't be a scar, and Vivian was actually locked up for a few days. For a moment, I felt that God had been a little kinder to me. This competition I participated in was quite special because it was the last one. And I've always really wanted to win the first prize in this competition. The last session means it's my last chance. Currently, there are few painters in the country who can be my opponents. But a painting emerged as a dark horse in the competition. I went to see that painting. It was very spiritual. Like a rose blooming freely in the wild bushes. The signature in the lower right corner of that painting was Vivian. The day after she was released from the detention center, she submitted the painting at the last moment. And then, it met my painting in the final round. Because it was the last competition, the selection method was a bit special this time. On the day of the selection, the first and second places would be voted for on site by 9 judges. The selection and the exhibition were on the same day. So famous painters in the industry would all come. After greeting several acquaintances, I saw Vivian in a red and white dress. Such bright colors didn't affect her at all. She sat beside me without hesitation, and we both looked up at our paintings hanging high in the center of the stage. Zephyr is one of the judges this time, right? Guess whether he'll vote for you or for me? The girl who scratched my face smiled as if nothing had happened, propped her chin, and said to me with great interest, I guess he'll vote for you. After all, you two are getting married. He used to be like this to me too. Whenever I had a competition, he would come and help me revise my paintings all night. She squinted her eyes and smiled meaningfully. Zephyr never came to the competitions I participated in. Nor did he help me revise any paintings. I found her words harsh. But I didn't want to show that I cared. Fortunately, had him fulfilled my desire. At this time, the room fell into darkness, and the selection officially began. The Klitschde host lied and up the atmosphere. And then came the more gimmicky part, judges voted for the paintings on site. Vivian's and my painting styles were quite different. I basically studied painting techniques in China, and my style was more introverted and meticulous. Several big names in the industry voted for me without hesitation. Because Vivian studied abroad, her painting style was more flamboyant, personalized, and had a strong sense of impact. Several emerging artists in the circle voted for her. As a result, it became a 4-to-4 situation. I really didn't expect that the final decisive vote would fall on the man who had been sitting on the side, looking calm all the time. Zephyr. What did I say? It's really him who decides who will win between us. Then you're sure to win. How could Zephyr vote for me? The girl chuckled. But the applause she gave me seemed rather sarcastic. Obviously, having fulfilled YMCA, this competition was very important to me. If I won the first place, having fulfilled YMCA, I should be happy. But her words made me feel even more annoyed. The host on the stage began to announce the final result. The media and reporters turned on their flashlights and started taking pictures of us. After a brief silence, the host raised his voice. So, congratulations, Ms. Vivian. Your painting Wild Sea has become the first place winner of this art exhibition. There was applause from the audience. I admit that I was stunned for a moment. I looked up and watched the girl beside me tuck her hair behind her ears and walk onto the podium in high heels. Before leaving, she said in a volume that only I could hear, "I thought you were a loser in love. It seems that you're not as good as me in painting skills either." The art exhibition officially opened after the judging ended. Next came the time for guests to visit freely. I stood in front of my painting, but the second place label on it was a bit dazzling. "It's really beautiful." Suddenly, a voice with a smile rang in my ear. I turned my head. Leo was standing there with his hands in his pockets, wearing black-rimmed glasses, dressed casually. "How come you have time today, Oscar?" I was a bit surprised by his arrival. He just bent down and carefully examined my painting. "Why isn't this the first place? The judges must be blind." Only he could say something like this to question the top figures in the industry. Although she tried her best to show the effect of light and shadow, her skills are not good enough. "Look at these several places. The strokes are too heavy." A finger with distinct joints suddenly came into our sight, followed by the man's deep and serious voice. "The first place painting is done in one go. Compared with it, Aurora, you're not as spiritual as her." Zephyr raised his eyes and looked at me inferiorly. I didn't know how the big judge had the leisure to come over here and even took the trouble to explain it to me. It made me even more embarrassed in an instant. Then I heard Leo's voice beside me, with a smile and a slight provocation. "I see. But in my eyes, her painting is the first place. After all, she's the only one in my eyes. And the only paintings I can see are hers. Naturally, she's the best to me." Leo has a lively and unrestrained personality. I'm not surprised at all that he suddenly said such off-the-wall words. But Zephyr, who had been silent, looked even gloomier after hearing his words. The two men, one with his thin lips tightly pressed, the other smiling extremely mockingly. An undercurrent was surging. Just then, a sweet voice interrupted the stalemate. "Zephyr, the organizer wants to take a group photo. Come quickly." Vivian's appearance was like a blooming golden stamen. She deliberately ignored me, and then called the man beside her intimately. Zephyr stood there, looking at me. I thought that in the past, I would have stepped forward to please him. His behavior was taken for granted. He was waiting for me to give in. But this time I didn't. So after a moment of eye contact, the man turned around and left me without hesitation. I don't quite remember how I left the venue that day. I just felt that the sunset that day was particularly dazzling, like a scarlet silk wrapping around people's thoughts. In the evening, the organizer held a dinner party, but I didn't attend. The lively gathering and me walking out wrapped in a coat would probably form a sharp contrast. A car horn sounded behind me. I looked back. The arc of the white sports car was extremely beautiful in the thin and transparent light of the sunset. The person who rolled down the car window spoke in a tone I was all too familiar with. "Come on. Want to go watch the sunset?" I almost forgot that this Leo was also the son of a hospital-owning family. "Are you very sad because you didn't get the first place?" The car was speeding on the vast road. He glanced at me through the rear-view mirror and asked casually. although I really didn't want to admit it. But yes, heaven fulfilled my ancestor. It was like that. I leaned against the car window, looking at the sunset and the row upon row of slanting shadows of high-rise buildings. This competition is the last one. I first knew about Zephyr because of this competition. Since I was a child, my academic performance has been pretty good. I'm not a child prodigy talked about among parents. But I didn't have much trouble getting to the top of the rankings in a key high school. When I was a child, my parents, adhering to the principle that children should have a special skill, never stopped signing me up for painting classes. In my sophomore year of high school, I reached a crossroads in my life. I had to choose between the liberal art, science track or the art specialty student track. At that time, my parents were arguing, and I didn't want to stay at home, so I would often go to the art studio. Before that, the teacher had organized us to visit an art exhibition, and the first place work in the exhibition left a very deep impression on me. Zephyr's paintings have a kind of power that can be engraved in people's minds. It's like a solitary blade of wind and snow, but with the wild brushstrokes of the spiritual world. At that time, I took a photo of this painting and kept copying it. As the cicadas chirped longer in the summer, I just couldn't copy the effect I wanted. Just as I was a bit discouraged and smeared the paint on it again, a finger with distinct joints suddenly appeared in my field of vision. Look here. Light isn't painted like this. A particularly light voice. Because he bent over to look at the painting at the same level as me. He was a bit close to me. I turned to look at him. His tall and straight nose. The shirt that was a bit white under the sunlight. And his eyes that were so deep and focused on the painting in his sight. He squatted beside me. And then I watched him rub the clean end of his finger across my painting, getting a smear of bright paint on it. He outlined a shape that I hadn't noticed before. Even when copying, don't just copy a painting. Think more about what you really want to paint. The cold and handsome guy lowered his eyes, said this sentence, and then left. A moment later, I turned around and saw the art studio teacher leaning against the door, looking at me with a look of hitting the jackpot. Do you know who that was just now? Who? The teacher raised his chin, and my eyes fell on the signature of the copied painting. Zephyr. That was the first time I knew this name. Later, I told my parents that I wanted to pursue a career in painting. I hoped that one day, my paintings would also be displayed in that exhibition hall. But it seems that until the last session of the competition, I still haven't achieved this goal. I said, feeling a bit discouraged. It's a lie to say that I'm not sad. That feeling of trying my best but getting nothing, and being denied by others without hesitation is like the sun burning my heart. So, are you very sad? Leo listened to my story all the way without much reaction, just asking me softly. Yes. I nodded and admitted. Then put all the unhappiness behind you. He raised his hand and pressed a button in the car. The car roof was slowly retracted, and in an instant, the sunset shone on the earth. I didn't know what he was going to do. And then he stepped on the gas pedal, and I was almost thrown out of my wits. Then I slowly remembered that during our school days, although Leo and I were the best of friends, I was the good at everything student in the teacher's eyes, while he was a troublemaking and unruly student. One day, during the last class in the afternoon of high school, he asked me if I wanted to go with him. I asked where we were going. At the age of 16, he stole his brother's motorcycle without a license and took me from the shabby school to the boundless horizon of the city. Now, it seems like he's trying to kill me. After taking several extremely tricky turns where a slow turn of the steering wheel could have sent us off a cliff, I suddenly felt that it wasn't me who was heartbroken. It should be the guy beside me. He was driving at an extremely fast speed. I could hardly distinguish the scenery in front of me. We rushed straight down the downhill road, and even the sense of weightlessness rushed to my heart. This isn't about leaving my troubles behind. This is about leaving my life behind. But at that moment when my adrenaline was surging, I actually had the thought it might be okay to die like this. The city seemed to be upside down, and the sunset was like a grand finale. The scenery in front of me was like the most magnificent curtain call. The car rushed straight towards the empty cliff. Just before crossing the horizon, it suddenly stopped. The last ray of the sunset hid behind the twilight line, and crows cawed loudly. Due to inertia and the buffering of the seat belt, we both jolted forward. The windshield wipers kept flashing. I looked down and saw that 2 tires had already gone over the cliff. I lay in the seat, looking at the bright sky. He lay on the steering wheel and said to me seriously with a smile, "Because this is the last competition. So it's just right. Just right to end where it all started." When I got home, Zephyr still wasn't back. Well, their social events usually last a long time. Besides, Vivian was at this gathering. Vivian. Even now, I still can't figure out how much she weighs in Zephyr's heart. After graduating from high school, I was admitted to the same university as Zephyr as I wished. However, before I could fulfill the obsession in my heart, or even get a chance to be by his side, I was told by a friend in the same grade that Zephyr already had a girlfriend. That's right. As a talented painter from a prominent family, there were as many girls admiring him as carp crossing the river. Even though he rarely appeared in front of the camera and didn't even bother to interact with his fans, his girlfriend was quite famous in our school at that time. One reason was that Vivian forced one of her roommates to jump off a building in her freshman year. The other was that one of her paintings made her the youngest winner of a certain award at that time. She was indeed a bold, flamboyant, passionate, and extremely self-centered girl. It's not strange that someone like Zephyr was attracted to her. She was like a gorgeous and flamboyant flower, with extremely high painting talent, wild and unrestrained, which indeed fit the wild and confused mental state of an artist. So much so that Zephyr, who hadn't posted on Moments for ages, specially updated a Moments post for her. That was the 7th year I had a crush on Zephyr. Once, hunting Tufeld Laedsai, I participated in a speech contest, and my final opponent happened to be Vivian. I only remember one thing. Zephyr wasn't present when I was giving my speech. But when Vivian took the stage, he suddenly showed up. His eyes always followed her, and he gently clapped for her in the audience. It was a normal thing. But that day, my heart hurt unbearably while I was standing backstage. Zephyr always looked at her with such indulgence, allowing her to be willful, petulant, and go crazy anytime. I thought that if that incident hadn't happened, he would probably have stayed by her side forever. Only the 2 people involved at that time knew the specific contradictions. Generally speaking, Vivian was about to go abroad. She wanted Zephyr to accompany her. That Zephyr couldn't give up all his work just because she was going to study abroad for 2 or 3 years. So one day, this young lady, who always had to have things her way, completely exploded. She filmed a long video to incite online violence against Zephyr, saying that her boyfriend was controlling her and not allowing her to study abroad, and that Zephyr was having an affair with a student and was unfit to be a teacher. In fact, Zephyr had never forced her to stay in the country. Even at the beginning, it was she who aggressively pursued Zephyr. She blocked him in his office, took pictures of him, and incited netizens to scold him. Zephyr always had that expression, looking at her with a kind of indescribable sadness or something, letting her smear all the dirt on him. Perhaps it was because Zephyr's usual conduct was improper. Or perhaps Vivian's online image was still a bit negative. This online violence actually had the opposite effect. Most people sided with Zephyr, saying that Vivian was making baseless rumors. Some media contacted Zephyr, saying they were willing to provide a platform for him to clarify. Zephyr refused. After that, Vivian went abroad. Zephyr probably didn't see her off on the day she left, because I saw him in a pavilion by the school lake. The man was staring at the shimmering lake surface, not knowing what he was thinking. Later, I realized that the look in his eyes when he looked at Vivian was called helplessness. You say Zephyr is so cold and proud, but because he liked her, loved her, and indulged her without hesitation and gave her all his feelings, he couldn't respond to her hurt. That day, I don't know why, but I was somehow drawn to walk up to him. Zephyr didn't even remember that he had taught me a few years ago, but later he did remember me. Because since then, I was always in front of him, pestering him for a long time. When I was packing the last item into the suitcase, the door of the house opened. It was a midsummer night, or rather, early morning. The wind rushed into the entrance all at once. The man at the door just stared at me. He doesn't show it when he's drunk. So I didn't know if he was drunk. His collar was messy. And the gentle wind blew it into an arc. "Where are you going?" He lowered his eyes and asked me. As if it was just a normal greeting in the early morning. He stood between me outside and the suitcase I was pulling. Zephyr. I called his name. This name carried so much for me. No one knew that I had whispered it in the humid summer wind, and also in the desolate autumn rain. It was so tormenting and profound. I thought I wouldn't give up. After all, I had come this far. So, when facing him, I couldn't help but smile. "I'm leaving." He slightly turned sideways to make way for me. "When will you be back?" he asked me in a soft voice. As if he was certain that I was just throwing a tantrum or something. With a hint of irritable compromise in his words. "I'm not coming back." I dragged the slightly heavy suitcase and walked past him. He wasn't interested in helping me hold it. And this time he didn't even have the urge to speak. He just leaned against the door, watching me. The first ray of sunlight in the morning wasn't too dazzling. But I still squinted my eyes. When I raised my hand to block my forehead, the man behind me finally made a move. "Fine," let out a low sigh. "Then don't come back." That was the last thing he said to me that day. Heading fulfilled my obsession. Many years later, his friend happened to mention to me that Zephyr had muttered this sentence many times later. He said the stupidest thing he did was saying this stupid sentence to me back then. It takes about an hour by high-speed rail to get from the city where I work to my hometown. So when I got to my mother's courtyard, I could even have the wontons they had just made in the morning. When I was standing outside the door with my suitcase, I just happened to meet my mother, who had just bought groceries. I suspected that in the second before she saw me. She thought she saw a ghost. Why are you back?" My friends all praise my wonton-making skills. But actually, my mother's skills are even more superb. After I swallowed 3 wontons, my mother asked me cautiously. "Is it? Did you quarrel with Zephyr?" I nodded, put down my chopsticks, and said to her seriously, "Mom, I'm not going to marry him." I never thought that one day these words would come out of my mouth. I couldn't even imagine that I would be so calm when I said it. My mother, since I was a child, she has always adhered to the principle of making me independent. So she never interferes with my decisions. And of course, I have to bear the consequences of my actions. So when my friend's calls almost blew up my phone, I simply posted a WeChat moments to report my safety to several close friends and then turned off my phone. The wedding originally scheduled for July 16th with Zephyr has been cancelled due to certain reasons. I'm deeply sorry for the inconvenience caused. I turned off my phone like this and stayed at home, sleeping soundly for several days. It was like being in an endless cycle of dreams. I had this dream for a long time. There were hot summer days with cicadas chirping, rainy days with rumbling thunder, and snowy winter days. Sometimes Zephyr was in the dream, and sometimes he wasn't. But when I woke up one evening and thought about Zephyr again, I found that my heart was so calm. It was so calm that I was even scared. There was no more "that's our pain," no more irregular heartbeat. Many years later, I thought that moment was like an instant, but also like the accumulation of years detonating at a certain moment. After that moment, I could never feel that way again. When I turned on my phone again, there were almost hundreds of messages. Some were from friends who weren't very important. Some were obviously full of hostility and schadenfreude. There were no messages from Zephyr. But one of his buddies sent me quite a few messages. This guy is the type of sunny, cheerful, and friendly person who gets along with people easily. "Sister-in-law, what happened between you and Zephyr? Did Zephyr make you angry?" Let me tell you, Zephyr is not a bad person. He likes you. Really. We all know that. He wouldn't treat you like this if he didn't like you. He's just stubborn with his words. You know? Don't be angry. Okay? Zephyr seems fine on the surface these days. But we can all tell that he's lost his soul. A few days ago, he drove into a telegraph pole in the middle of the night. Do you know that? He talked a lot. So I blocked him. I had already completed the online handover of my work at the original company. I had saved some money over the years, which was enough for me to live on for a while. My mother thought I was annoying staying at home, so I wandered around outside while starting to plan for the future. When I passed by a park, I happened to see some children from an interest class sketching in the park. Nowadays, kids are really good. Unlike us back then, who just drew casually for fun. I was interested in a little girl who was quietly painting. Her paintings were beautiful, and she was the idol of many of her peers. But the structure was a bit rigid, and it could be seen that she painted according to a set pattern. "Little friend, why did you put the light here?" I pointed to her painting and asked. "But the teacher said the light should be drawn here. But when we paint, we should observe with our eyes. Right?" I patted her on the shoulder and looked for the shimmering reflection on the lake with her. But after a while, she stopped talking. I heard her say, "Sister, there's a handsome brother looking at you." I looked in the direction she pointed. The floating light of the setting sun fell on the shoulder of the man in a black shirt. He still had that sense of isolation from the world, but it was strange. My heart was dull, and I no longer had the stunning feeling I had when I was desperate for him. The sun set, and the children who were sketching left. He and I stood quietly beside a swing in the park. I always felt that if I didn't speak, he wouldn't say a single word in his life, so I turned around and left directly. A moment later, my wrist was grabbed. There was the smell of pine wood and a bit of cigarette smoke. He hadn't smoked for a long time, and I didn't know why he started smoking again recently. "Aurora." He called my name. "Does it have to end up like this?" I saw him frowning slightly, as if he couldn't figure it out no matter what. Actually, headings have filled my obsession. I couldn't figure it out either. "Why? No." He seemed not to understand. "Zephyr, this shouldn't be considered a tantrum. My purpose isn't to make you coax me. I just don't want to marry you anymore. And I don't want to be by your side either. Who am I? Right? No one cares. So, Zephyr, congratulations. I won't pester you anymore." He still looked at me with a frown. I nodded at him, took 2 steps back, and then turned around and went home. I didn't expect to meet him again in front of my house the next night. The night was lonely and noisy. The black Phaeton slowly rolled down the car window, revealing the man's slightly tired face. I wanted to walk past him, but then he opened the car door and blocked my way. The cicadas were chirping loudly in the summer. I stared at him across the car door. The light from the street lamp was dim, and I couldn't find the increasingly long shadow. I didn't have anything to do with Vivian. Regarding the judging of that competition, I did indeed have a slight preference for her in my heart. "If you really mind, I won't participate in the scoring of competitions where you're present in the future." "No." I interrupted him, and his eyebrows twitched. "There is no future for us, Zephyr." His face darkened again, as if he didn't understand why I was still like this. "The result of the competition ends Zephyr. These two things are separate. I don't care about the competition. And I don't care about Zephyr either. It's not that I don't care." I emphasized my tone and repeated it. "I don't even want to see Zephyr again." I thought he should understand by now, but he wouldn't let me go. In the moonlight, I saw him lower his eyes. "Aurora, I don't know what I did wrong to make you unhappy. If there is anything, you tell me, and I'll change. We don't have to let things develop like this." "Zephyr." I suddenly called his name, ignoring his startled expression, and slammed the car door shut. "Who the hell do you think you are? Do you think I'll do whatever you say? When you like me, I have to like you. And when you don't, I have to stay away from you. Are you a big star? Who cares about you?" These words, after going around in circles, returned to him. I no longer looked at the expression of the man in the deep shadows. I turned around and walked into the dim night. Zephyr started coming to see me every now and then. Logically speaking, this should be the busiest period for him. That day, when I went out in the morning, I saw him again in the black Phaeton. "Aurora." He was holding something in his hand. It seemed to be wanton sold in the East Market. I thought that a long time ago, I had mentioned to him that I loved the wontons from this place when I was a child. He didn't completely forget things about me. I stood there, looking at him, Zephyr. It's embarrassing for an adult not to know how to end things. His hand dropped again, and he stood there looking at me. I thought that for someone as proud as him, the most embarrassing thing he had ever done in his life was probably coming to his ex-girlfriend's house to seek reconciliation. But he could still be so persistent. Aurora. Don't leave. I have something to tell you. Seeing that I was about to walk past him again, he grabbed my hand, that this time I shook it off. He stood there, stunned, looking at me. Zephyr. I called his name again. And I noticed that he actually took a quick breath when I called him. Tell me when I come back. His eyebrows relaxed a bit. And he stood there looking at me. I turned around when I was 100 meters away. He was still looking at me from where he was. My visa came true. I also bought the plane ticket. A senior who had a good relationship with me during my undergraduate years opened a studio in New Zealand and invited me to develop there. Actually, I had always wanted to explore the Western market. But it was put on hold because of Zephyr before. He couldn't go abroad. And I wanted to accompany him. So I gradually gave up this idea. My mom also quite supported me to go out and see the world. She said that she would come to me when I was settled there. These days, I had actually been waiting for the visa to come through. My flight was in the afternoon today. I didn't need to bring much luggage as she had a full set of supplies there. When I was sitting on the plane, I thought that I didn't really lie to Zephyr. I did tell him to wait until I came back to talk to me. I just didn't tell him that I would never come back. After that, I went to New Zealand to find my senior. Many things happened during that time. Some happy, some sad. After that, in order to get inspiration, I went on a budget travel around the world and became even more homeless. Most of the time, I could only keep in touch with my friends in China through postcards. My mom found a job at a senior university, teaching people to write. She said that she couldn't count on me. And in a few years, she would also travel around the country. After winning that award, Vivian never achieved anything else. Some people said that she had run out of talent, but art is such a nebulous thing. The prodigy suddenly fell. A few years later, it was revealed that she maintained her artistic inspiration by taking drugs. After being banned in China, she came abroad, still indulging in the decadent temptation every day. Soon, had on a low side, various indecent photos of her spread on social platforms. The last time I saw a photo of her on a friend's phone, she seemed to like wearing white dresses. But her sunken eye sockets, paired with her frighteningly white makeup and an expression that was hard to read, almost made her look like a hungry ghost whose spirit had been sucked dry. I witnessed her rise to fame and then her decline. When I saw that photo of her in the end, I really didn't feel anything. I had forgotten about her and those complicated emotions that had been swirling in the vortex for too long. So, there was only an empty stare left. Leo quit being a doctor and formed a band. This was indeed something he could do. He was like a free bird. In fact, some of our friends said, "Hey, Aurora, can't you tell that Oscar likes you?" But sometimes, aren't some people better off as friends? I opened the postcard he sent me under the aurora in Iceland. There was a group photo of their band and a handwritten letter from him. He said, "Aurora. Actually, sometimes I admire your courage to pursue. Whether it's success or failure. You've tried. It's silly, and but you're brave. Because, Pazzi, I think, you mean, I'm the one who doesn't dare to reach out and pursue." I closed the letter. I watched the white mist I exhaled, diffusing in the emerald green starry sky. Extra story: The Isolated Isle, and Oscar was an editor of a third-rate art magazine. Every day, he made a living by writing some gossip in the art circle and creating eye-catching headlines. That day, his editor-in-chief told him that they had found a great painter. If they did a good interview, this issue of the magazine would surely sell well. For this, he washed his hair, which he hadn't washed for 3 days, and even wore a shirt he had just bought a few days ago. But when he arrived at the great painter's address, his heart skipped a beat. As he climbed the old stairs, his heart skipped a beat again. Whoever heard of a great painter living in a house in such an old neighborhood? "Who are you?" A man in his 30s or 40s came over to talk to him when he saw him standing at the door. He was wearing a washed-out white shirt and black shorts. Although his appearance was a bit haggard, his regular features were hard to hide, and he really had a bit of an artist's temperament. He was holding two bowls of wontons and asked him inferiorly. "Oh, Ole, I'm an editor from Look at the World magazine. We made an appointment before." Feeling that the other person seemed legitimate, Oscar rubbed his hands and said with a smile. The man looked at him for a couple of times and then nodded, opening the door for him. "My wife is probably sleeping. Keep your voice down." Oscar nodded, thinking that this decadent painter was quite nice to his wife. The man's room was very clean. The window was open, and the cool breeze from outside blew up the snow-white curtains. The room was quiet. There were two of everything. 2 pairs of slippers. 2 dolls. The man put the wontons on the table and then said towards the room. "Honey. You're awake. I just bought wontons. Eat them while they're hot. Okay?" As soon as Oscar heard this, he was thinking about how to greet the hostess of this house. But after waiting for a long time, no one came out of the room. He looked up and met the man's black pupils. The man raised his eyebrows, looking at him in confusion. Your wife? Huh? Where is your wife?" "She's right here." It was midsummer, but the wind blowing in from the window made his neck feel cold. He could see that the man seemed to be holding something, but there was nothing beside him. "You." Oscar was sweating profusely, and goosebumps were all over his body. He wanted to say, "Don't kid me." Then he saw the man squatting in front of the chair, picking up a wonton with chopsticks and feeding it towards the air. "It's not hot. These are your favorite." I remember everything." "Pate." The wonton dropped on the chair, splashing some delicate soup. The man picked up the second wonton and still fed it towards the air. "I won't make you unhappy anymore." It dropped again. This time, it rolled on the ground and got covered with fine dust. "I'll do anything you want me to. I won't treat you like that again. I really won't." Once again, the wonton slipped off the chopsticks and spilled everywhere. The sight made Oscar jump. Damn it. Either the man was crazy or he was possessed. After thinking for 2 or 3 seconds, he turned around and ran. He was even considerate enough to close the door for the man. He ran down the stairs without looking back, as if there was some fierce beast chasing him behind. When he was gasping for breath under the huge banyan tree downstairs, an aunt who was buying groceries happened to pass by. Thinking of the task assigned by his editor-in-chief, he couldn't leave without getting anything. So he stopped the aunt to ask, "Auntie, excuse me, do you know who the person in room 408 is?" As soon as she heard room 408, the aunt became very animated, as if she was about to wave a garlic stop on his head. "Room 408? Oh, a crazy guy. I heard he was a painter before." "What painter would live in this old house?" "Who knows? He's always imagining that he has a wife. But there's no such person." Speaking of this, the aunt leaned closer to him mysteriously. "But I heard that his real wife ran away, and he was so stimulated that he drove a car off the cliff in the middle of the night. His hand was broken. He can't hold a paintbrush anymore. And he's completely crazy. Someone came to take him for treatment before, but he didn't want to go. They asked him why he didn't want to go. He said that if he got cured, he wouldn't be able to see his imaginary wife." "You say? Isn't he a fool?" Oscar nodded and closed his notebook. The art world is like this. Some people are rising stars, while others are like fallen ruins. For then, they only care about the value that exists in the present. Who is Zephyr? He doesn't know. Even if his editor-in-chief told him that Zephyr was once a very famous painter, and now that person is just a poor wretch who stays in an old house all day, going crazy. She left, taking away all his pride and inspiration. Without the paintbrush, the muse no longer visited him. Since then, he has been in a slump, decadent beyond measure. He doesn't even have the value of being interviewed by a third-rate magazine. Rotting in the old house surrounded by spring branches. No one will ever know. The end.